"I reject you," he sneered. The Alpha King didn't know I was pregnant with his heir. How could someone reject another person without knowing the truth they carried? And what happens when a single decision is made before every hidden fact comes to light? If emotional stories filled with destiny, heartbreak, and second chances are your favorite, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Now tell us in the comments, if you were in this situation, would you reveal the truth or keep it hidden? With that question lingering in the air, everything begins at the moment when one choice quietly sets an unforgettable story into motion. Sometimes the deepest wounds are left by the words we never expected to hear. Claire Anderson stood in the center of Blackstone Keep's great ceremonial hall as hundreds of wolves watched in complete silence. Silver banners hung from towering stone columns, flickering beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, while snow drifted softly beyond the massive stained-glass windows. Every heartbeat inside the room seemed to echo louder than the ceremonial drums that had welcomed the gathering only moments before. Claire's blue eyes never left the man standing across from her. Alpha King Lucas Whitmore wore the black ceremonial coat reserved only for rulers of the northern packs, his silver insignia catching the light as he looked at her with an expression so unreadable that even his closest advisors remained perfectly still. Claire had imagined this moment countless times. She had prepared herself for difficult questions, for doubt, even for disappointment. She had never prepared herself for the quiet finality in his voice. Lucas drew a slow breath before speaking words that shattered every hope she had carefully protected. "I reject you." The sentence was calm, measured, and painfully brief. No anger filled his voice. No cruelty flashed across his face. Yet those 3 words settled over the hall like winter frost, leaving every witness too stunned to speak. Claire felt the warmth drain from her face, but she refused to let anyone see her break. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and met his eyes one final time. Around them, whispers slowly rippled through the gathered pack. Some lowered their heads in sympathy. Others exchanged uncertain glances, wondering what had led their Alpha King to such a public decision. Claire heard none of it. Her heartbeat drowned out every sound until all she could hear was the quiet rhythm inside her own chest. Almost without thinking, her trembling hand rested gently against her lower abdomen beneath the folds of her cream-colored cloak. The gesture lasted only a second before she lowered her hand again, careful that no one nearby noticed. There was a truth hidden beneath her silence, one she had only recently discovered herself, and in that single heartbreaking moment, she made a decision that would change more than one life. She would not speak. Not today. Not here. If Lucas no longer trusted her, she would never use the child she carried as a reason for him to stay. Love demanded honesty, not obligation. She turned away with quiet dignity and began walking across the polished marble floor. Every step echoed through the silent chamber until the massive wooden doors opened before her. No one tried to stop her. Snowflakes drifted into the hall as the cold winter air wrapped gently around her shoulders. Behind her, Lucas remained motionless. Something deep inside him urged him to call her name, to ask her to wait, to question why the sight of her walking away felt strangely unbearable. Yet pride and uncertainty held him silent. Claire stepped beyond the castle doors into the falling snow, leaving only a trail of footprints stretching toward the ancient pine forest beyond Blackstone Keep. High above the castle towers, the full moon emerged from behind thick clouds, bathing the frozen landscape in pale silver light. Deep within the oldest chamber of the castle, the moonstone gave off the faintest shimmer, almost as if it had witnessed a choice that destiny itself had never intended either of them to make. 3 weeks earlier, hope still lived in the quiet spaces between ordinary moments. Winter had settled gently over Blackstone Keep, covering rooftops and ancient pine trees with a blanket of fresh snow that sparkled beneath the pale morning sun. Claire Anderson moved through the castle courtyard carrying a woven basket filled with warm bread, dried herbs, and jars of healing salve. She greeted every servant, every guard, and every child with the same sincere smile, stopping whenever someone needed a helping hand. Most members of the pack saw her as a kind Omega whose gentle heart seemed too soft for the harsh realities of royal life, but they never noticed the quiet strength hidden beneath her calm demeanor. Claire never asked for recognition. She believed kindness only mattered when it expected nothing in return. From the balcony above the courtyard, Lucas Whitmore reviewed reports with his council while preparing for another day of royal responsibilities. Merchants waited for trade approvals, neighboring alphas requested meetings, and village leaders sought guidance before the deepest weeks of winter arrived. Lucas listened carefully to every concern, making thoughtful decisions with the steady confidence expected of an alpha king. Yet more than once, his attention drifted away from the official documents spread across the large oak table. His eyes found Claire almost without intention. He watched as she knelt beside a frightened little girl whose basket of apples had tipped across the snowy path. Claire laughed softly while gathering each apple one by one, brushing away the snow before returning them to the grateful child. The little girl wrapped her arms around Claire in appreciation before running happily toward her family. Lucas found himself smiling before he realized it. One of his senior advisors noticed the brief expression. "She has a way of making difficult days seem lighter," the advisor observed quietly. Lucas looked away from the courtyard and returned to the documents before him. "She reminds people that compassion still belongs inside these walls." His answer surprised even himself. Later that afternoon, Claire entered the castle greenhouse where winter flowers continued blooming despite the cold outside. Caring for the fragile plants had always helped quiet her thoughts whenever life inside the castle became overwhelming. As she carefully watered a row of white lilies, Lucas unexpectedly stepped through the glass doorway. Neither of them had planned the meeting, yet neither seemed eager to leave. For several comfortable moments, they admired the peaceful garden in silence. "The flowers seem healthier every time I visit," Lucas finally said. Claire smiled without looking up. "They only need patience, sunlight, and someone willing to believe they will bloom." Lucas glanced toward her with thoughtful eyes. "People are not very different." Claire laughed softly. "Some people simply hide their winters better than others." Their eyes met for only a moment before footsteps echoed through the greenhouse corridor. A royal messenger entered carrying sealed letters marked with the crest of the High Council. The messenger bowed respectfully before handing the documents to Lucas. As Lucas opened the first letter, the warmth in his expression slowly disappeared, replaced by quiet concern. Claire noticed the change immediately, but asked no questions. She simply wished him a peaceful afternoon before leaving the greenhouse, unaware that the words written inside those official pages had already planted the first seeds of doubt that would soon grow into a misunderstanding capable of changing both of their lives forever. The letter from the High Council remained on Lucas Whitmore's desk long after the sun had disappeared behind the snow-covered mountains. Every sentence had been written with careful precision, yet each line carried the same quiet accusation. Anonymous witnesses claimed that Claire Anderson had been meeting with strangers beyond the eastern forest, speaking in secret and hiding information from the pack. There was no proof attached to the report, only carefully chosen words designed to create suspicion where trust had once existed. Lucas read the pages again and again, searching for something that felt undeniable, but every conclusion seemed to rest on uncertainty instead of fact. Even so, the responsibility of protecting every member of the northern packs demanded caution. He could not simply ignore the warning, no matter how much he wanted to. Meanwhile, Claire walked through the small marketplace just outside the castle walls, delivering medicine to an elderly couple before stopping to help a farmer whose wagon wheel had frozen in the snow. The simple acts filled her afternoon with purpose, yet an unusual wave of exhaustion settled over her before she returned home. At first, she blamed the cold weather and the endless errands, but over the following days the feeling refused to disappear. Even the scent of fresh bread, something she had always loved, suddenly made her stomach uneasy. Concerned, the castle healer invited her into a warm stone cottage where fragrant herbs hung drying from the wooden ceiling beams. The older woman asked gentle questions, listened carefully, and smiled with quiet understanding before asking Claire to return the following morning. Claire barely slept that night. Countless possibilities crossed her mind, but none felt real enough to believe. The next morning the healer welcomed her beside a crackling fireplace and spoke with the calm confidence earned through decades of experience. "Claire," she said softly, "you're going to have a child." For several long seconds the room became perfectly still. Claire stared at the dancing firelight, unable to find words. Slowly her hands rose to rest against her abdomen, not from fear but from overwhelming disbelief. Tears gathered in her eyes, not because she felt alone, but because she suddenly realized another heartbeat had quietly become part of her own future. The healer gently squeezed her hand. "You have every reason to hope." Claire nodded through grateful tears, already imagining the tiny life she had not yet met. She thought immediately of Lucas. Her first instinct was to tell him, to share the news with the one person who deserved to know. But before she could leave the cottage, another messenger arrived at the castle carrying additional reports for the Alpha King. Throughout the next several days, Lucas became increasingly distant, consumed by meetings with council members and private discussions that Claire was never invited to attend. Every time their paths crossed, polite smiles replaced the easy conversations they had once shared. Claire sensed the growing distance but could not understand its cause. She quietly decided to wait for the right moment, believing honesty deserved calm rather than haste. She never imagined that while she carefully protected joyful news inside her heart, unseen hands were patiently weaving a misunderstanding that would soon convince the man she trusted most to question everything he thought he knew about her. The days leading to the winter moon ceremony passed with a silence that felt heavier than the falling snow. Claire Anderson noticed the change in Lucas Whitmore long before anyone else dared mention it. He was never unkind, but the warmth that once softened every conversation had disappeared behind polite distance and measured words. Whenever their paths crossed inside the castle corridors, he acknowledged her with respectful courtesy before continuing toward another council meeting. Claire searched his face for an explanation, yet every glance left her with more questions than answers. She wondered whether the burden of ruling the northern packs had simply become too great, convincing herself that patience was the kindest gift she could offer. Deep inside, however, she could not ignore the quiet ache growing beside the joyful secret she carried. Each morning, she placed her hand gently against her abdomen and whispered promises that no one else could hear. She promised that no matter what happened, this child would always know kindness before fear and honesty before pride. Meanwhile, inside the council chamber, the anonymous reports continued to arrive. One advisor insisted that Claire had been seen speaking with unfamiliar travelers near the eastern forest. Another claimed she had accepted sealed packages from unknown visitors. None of the accusations came with reliable witnesses, yet each new report strengthened the doubts already taking root among the council members. Lucas challenged every claim, demanding proof instead of rumors, but certainty never came. The High Council reminded him that an Alpha King could not allow personal feelings to cloud his judgment. Their repeated warnings slowly transformed caution into hesitation and hesitation into painful uncertainty. One cold afternoon, Lucas stood alone on the castle balcony, overlooking the frozen valley below. From that distance, he spotted Claire helping several children shape snow into the form of a large wolf beneath the old pine trees. Their laughter drifted upward through the crisp winter air. For a brief moment, he remembered the greenhouse and her quiet words about flowers surviving long winters. Nothing about the woman below resembled the image described in the council reports. She looked exactly as she always had, gentle, patient, and quietly generous. His instincts urged him to trust the person he had come to know instead of the whispers surrounding her, but every ruler carried responsibilities that reached beyond the heart. As sunset painted the snow with shades of gold and amber, the royal historian arrived carrying an ancient ceremonial ledger that had not been opened for generations. He informed Lucas that the winter moon ceremony required every Alpha and Omega with recognized royal connections to stand before the pack when the moon reached its highest point. The ceremony itself would reveal nothing new, he explained, but tradition demanded complete transparency before the entire kingdom. Lucas nodded thoughtfully, unaware that destiny had chosen that very gathering to test every decision he was about to make. Elsewhere in the castle, Claire quietly folded a tiny hand-woven blanket she had begun making in secret. She smiled softly as she tucked it safely inside a cedar chest beneath her bed, believing there would still be time to tell Lucas everything after the ceremony ended. Neither of them realized that by waiting only a little longer, they were walking toward the very moment that would separate their lives before either had the chance to speak the truth that mattered most. The night of the winter moon ceremony arrived beneath a sky so clear that every star seemed close enough to touch. Thousands of silver lanterns illuminated the ancient courtyard of Blackstone Keep, while members of every northern pack gathered in respectful silence. Elders wearing ceremonial robes stood beside towering stone pillars carved with the history of generations long past. Musicians played slow, graceful melodies that echoed across the snow-covered grounds, creating an atmosphere that felt both solemn and timeless. Claire Anderson walked through the grand entrance, wearing a simple ivory gown beneath her winter cloak. She had never cared for elaborate displays, but tonight she carried herself with quiet confidence. Beneath her calm expression rested the precious secret she had chosen to protect until the right moment. As she stepped into the courtyard, several familiar faces greeted her warmly, unaware of the uncertainty quietly surrounding her name. Across the gathering, Lucas Whitmore stood before the ceremonial platform prepared for the Alpha King. Every pair of eyes eventually turned toward him, yet his attention drifted toward Claire almost immediately. For the briefest moment, memories of their conversations in the greenhouse returned with surprising clarity. He remembered her gentle laugh, her patient kindness, and the way she always seemed able to calm even the busiest day. Those memories battled against the endless warnings repeated by the High Council until he no longer knew which voice deserved his trust. The royal historian opened the ancient ceremonial ledger and began reading the traditional words that welcomed another winter moon ceremony. One by one, representatives from every family stepped forward to affirm their loyalty before the gathered pack. Everything unfolded according to tradition until one of the senior council members quietly approached Lucas and handed him another sealed document bearing the official crest of the High Council. Lucas opened it with visible hesitation. Inside waited yet another anonymous statement insisting that Claire had secretly met unknown visitors only days earlier and urging immediate action before the ceremony concluded. He closed his eyes for a single heartbeat, struggling to separate duty from instinct. When he looked across the courtyard again, Claire was smiling gently at an elderly woman who had nearly slipped on the icy stone walkway. She reached out without hesitation, helping the woman regain her balance before quietly stepping back into the gathering. Nothing about her actions resembled deception, yet the weight of leadership demanded decisions even when certainty remained painfully out of reach. The music slowly faded as the historian announced the final ceremonial recognition of the evening. Lucas stepped forward onto the raised platform. The entire courtyard fell silent. Snowflakes drifted through the moonlight as every member of the pack waited for their Alpha King to speak. Claire looked toward him with calm expectation, believing this gathering would finally create the peaceful moment she had been waiting for. Instead, Lucas felt the burden of countless responsibilities pressing against every instinct inside him. His heart urged patience. His position demanded judgment. For one unbearable moment, the distance between them seemed greater than the entire kingdom surrounding Blackstone Keep. Above the ancient castle towers, the full moon emerged completely from behind the clouds, bathing the courtyard in brilliant silver light as destiny quietly prepared to test every promise, every fear, and every choice that had brought them to this unforgettable night. Lucas Whitmore looked across the silent courtyard, and for one impossible moment, he wished he were simply a man instead of a king. Every instinct urged him to walk down from the ceremonial platform and ask Claire Anderson a single honest question before making any decision. Yet the eyes of every alpha, every elder, and every family within the northern packs rested upon him. The High Council stood only a few feet away, waiting for the judgment they believed would prove that their ruler placed duty above personal attachment. The ancient ceremonial ledger remained open beside the royal historian, its weathered pages fluttering gently in the winter breeze. The historian watched quietly, sensing an uneasiness that words could not explain. Lucas tightened his grip around the sealed document still resting in his hand. The accusations inside had never been proven, but they had arrived one after another with unsettling consistency. If he ignored them and they were somehow true, the consequences could reach every pack under his protection. If they were false, one terrible mistake would destroy the trust of the one person who had never given him reason to doubt her. The silence became unbearable. Finally, Lucas raised his head. His voice remained calm, but those closest to him noticed the hesitation hidden beneath every carefully chosen word. He announced that after reviewing information presented to the crown, he could no longer move forward with recognizing Claire as his future Luna. A wave of disbelief swept through the gathering. No one shouted. No one interrupted. The shock was too great for words. Claire stood perfectly still, her blue eyes fixed on Lucas as though waiting for him to explain what she had just heard. Instead, only silence answered her. She searched his face one last time, hoping to find the warmth that had once lived there, but all she saw was a man carrying responsibilities too heavy for his own heart. A quiet sadness settled inside her, yet remarkably, no anger followed it. She understood that something had convinced him to doubt her, even if she did not know what it was. Her first instinct was to tell him everything. She almost placed his hand over the tiny life growing safely beneath her heart. She almost whispered the truth that would change the meaning of every word spoken that evening. But as she looked around the courtyard, she saw hundreds of people watching, waiting, judging. She could not allow an innocent child to become part of a public argument or appear to be evidence offered in desperation. Her dignity mattered. So did the future of the little one she already loved more than herself. Claire lowered her eyes for only a second before lifting them again with quiet strength. Without defending herself, without accusing anyone, and without revealing her secret, she offered a respectful bow to the Alpha King and to the gathered pack. The simple gesture carried more grace than any speech could have expressed. Then she turned and walked away across the snow-covered courtyard exactly as she would weeks later leave the great ceremonial hall, calm on the outside while her heart quietly shattered within. Lucas watched every step until she disappeared beyond the ancient stone gates. The instant she vanished from sight, an emptiness settled over him that no victory had ever erased and no responsibility could ever justify. Behind him, the royal historian glanced down at the open ceremonial ledger. For the briefest moment, a faded family crest hidden along the edge of one weathered page caught the moonlight in a way he had never noticed before, and an uneasy feeling whispered that the greatest truth of the evening had not walked away with the departing crowd, but with the woman now disappearing into the falling snow. Claire Anderson left Blackstone Keep before dawn, carrying only a small travel bag, a wool blanket, a few treasured books, and the tiny hand-woven blanket she had hidden beneath her bed. The snow muffled every footstep as she followed the narrow trail, leading away from the castle she had once believed would become her home. She did not look back. Some memories were already painful enough, without seeing the place where they had been broken. Several miles beyond the borders of the northern packs, tucked between rolling hills and towering pine forests, rested a peaceful village, known as Willow Creek. The villagers welcomed travelers without asking unnecessary questions, and an elderly healer named Margaret Ellis offered Claire a modest cottage beside a quiet stream. The small home was simple, with a stone fireplace, wooden floors polished smooth by time, and windows overlooking fields that would bloom with wildflowers when spring finally arrived. For the first time in weeks, Claire allowed herself to breathe without fear of whispers following her every step. Her days settled into a gentle rhythm. She helped Margaret prepare herbal remedies, delivered fresh bread to elderly neighbors, and spent quiet evenings sewing tiny clothes for the child growing safely beneath her heart. Although sadness occasionally found its way into the silent hours of the night, she never allowed bitterness to take root. Whenever she thought about Lucas Whitmore, she remembered the man who had admired blooming flowers inside the greenhouse instead of the king who had doubted her before the gathered pack. She silently hoped that one day he would discover peace, even if their paths never crossed again. Back at Blackstone Keep, however, peace became increasingly difficult to find. Lucas continued fulfilling every responsibility expected of an Alpha King, yet every victory felt strangely incomplete. Council meetings ended with successful agreements, neighboring packs praised his leadership, and winter supplies reached every village on schedule, but none of those accomplishments quieted the emptiness that had settled inside him after Claire's departure. He often caught himself glancing toward the castle courtyard, expecting to see her comforting frightened children or delivering baskets of fresh herbs to the elderly. Each familiar place reminded him of someone who was no longer there. One snowy afternoon, the royal historian returned to the ancient archives beneath the castle. The unusual shimmer he had noticed during the winter moon ceremony continued to trouble him. Determined to understand its meaning, he carefully removed forgotten ledgers, faded family records, and sealed correspondence untouched for generations. Hours passed before a single brittle parchment slipped from the pages of an old registry. The document recorded a noble bloodline once believed lost after a devastating winter many decades earlier. Attached to the record was an official seal identical to the delicate pendant Claire had worn beneath her cloak since childhood. The historian stared in disbelief. Claire had never claimed noble ancestry, yet the evidence suggested she belonged to one of the oldest and most honorable families ever recognized by the Northern Packs. Even more troubling was another discovery hidden among recent council correspondence. Several anonymous accusations carried identical handwriting despite claiming to come from different witnesses. His heartbeat quickened as the truth slowly emerged. Someone had carefully manufactured the evidence that persuaded the council to distrust Claire. Without wasting another moment, the historian gathered every document and hurried through the castle corridors toward the Alpha King's private study, unaware that the answers he carried would soon force Lucas to confront not only the greatest mistake of his reign, but also the heartbreaking possibility that the woman he had let walk away had been telling the truth all along. Lucas Whitmore listened in complete silence as the royal historian carefully placed the faded family records, forged reports, and handwritten comparisons across the large oak desk inside the private study. Every document pointed toward the same painful truth. Claire Anderson had never betrayed the Northern Packs. The accusations that had reached the High Council had been deliberately fabricated by someone who understood exactly how to turn uncertainty into suspicion. Lucas slowly picked up one of the anonymous letters, comparing it with another that supposedly came from a different witness. The handwriting matched perfectly. The wording repeated the same unusual phrases. Even the wax seals had been pressed from the same mold. The realization settled over him with unbearable weight. He had not simply doubted Claire. He had allowed carefully constructed lies to outweigh everything he personally knew about the woman whose kindness had never once failed him. The historian then unfolded the oldest parchment from the collection. The ancient record confirmed that Claire belonged to the long-forgotten House Ashbourne, a noble family honored for generations because they had protected the Northern Packs during one of the harshest winters in recorded history. Their descendants had quietly disappeared after choosing ordinary lives instead of titles, carrying only a single family pendant as proof of their heritage. Lucas immediately remembered the delicate silver pendant Claire always wore beneath her cloak. He had seen it countless times without ever asking about its history. The room fell silent again. Every memory now returned with painful clarity. Her compassion toward strangers. Her patience with children. Her refusal to seek recognition. Every action had revealed her character far more honestly than any council report ever could. Lucas closed his eyes for a long moment before speaking. "Find her," he said quietly. "Not as my future Luna. Not as someone expected to forgive me. Find her, because I owe her the truth." Before sunrise the next morning, Lucas left Blackstone Keep with only a small escort, choosing to travel without royal banners or ceremonial guards. He wanted no display of power, only the opportunity to face the consequences of his own decision. Days later, after following scattered reports from travelers and merchants who remembered a kind young woman helping villagers along the northern roads, he finally reached Willow Creek. The peaceful village looked untouched by the politics of the great packs. Children laughed beside a narrow stream while neighbors greeted one another by name. As Lucas slowly rode through the village, an elderly woman recognized the crest upon his cloak and quietly pointed toward a modest stone cottage surrounded by winter herbs and carefully stacked firewood. Lucas dismounted before reaching the front gate. Through the cottage window, he saw Claire sitting beside the fireplace, smiling softly as she folded impossibly small baby clothes with patient hands. Time itself seemed to stop. His breath caught as his eyes moved from the tiny garments to the gentle way Claire instinctively rested one hand against the life growing beneath her heart. No explanation was necessary. No one needed to speak. The truth stood before him more clearly than any ancient document ever could. Every missed conversation, every unanswered question, and every painful misunderstanding suddenly became part of one overwhelming realization. The child she had quietly protected since before the winter moon ceremony was his. Lucas remained outside the cottage, unable to take another step as the full weight of his choices settled upon him. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, he understood that the greatest failure of a ruler was not making a difficult decision, but making it before finding the courage to seek the whole truth. Claire Anderson looked up as a quiet knock echoed against the cottage door. She recognized the familiar presence before she even reached the entrance, and for a brief moment, she closed her eyes, gathering the strength that had carried her through every lonely mile since leaving Blackstone Keep. When she opened the door, Lucas Whitmore stood on the small wooden porch without his royal cloak, without ceremonial guards, and without the confidence of a king. He simply looked like a man carrying the weight of a decision he wished he could undo. Snow drifted gently between them while neither spoke. Finally, Lucas broke the silence. "I came because I learned the truth, but I also came because I failed to look for it when it mattered most." Claire listened quietly, her expression calm, yet guarded. She stepped aside, inviting him inside not because she had forgiven him, but because respect had always been part of her character. The fire crackled softly as Lucas noticed the tiny blanket resting beside the rocking chair. His eyes lingered there before returning to Claire. "I know about the baby," he said with a trembling voice. "I should have known much sooner." Claire rested one hand gently against her abdomen. "You could have known," she answered softly, "if you had asked instead of deciding." Her words carried no anger, only honest sorrow, and that quiet truth hurt more than any accusation ever could. Lucas lowered his head. "You are right. I believed reports written by strangers instead of trusting the woman I had watched care for everyone around her. I cannot change what I did, and I will never ask you to pretend it did not happen." The room fell silent again before he continued. "I am not here to demand another chance. I am here to accept responsibility. Whether you ever return with me or not, I want to be worthy of being this child's father." Tears gathered in Claire's eyes, not because she doubted his sincerity, but because she had waited so long to hear those words. Several days later, Claire agreed to travel back to Blackstone Keep, not as someone reclaiming a title, but as a woman determined to face the future on her own terms. When they arrived, the entire pack gathered once more beneath the ancient stone arches where everything had fallen apart. This time Lucas stood before them without hesitation. In front of the High Council, the elders, and every family of the northern packs, he openly acknowledged that forged accusations had influenced his judgment and accepted full responsibility for failing to seek the truth. He restored Claire's honor publicly, not because she needed permission to deserve respect, but because every injustice deserved to be corrected where it had first been witnessed. The council members who had relied upon false evidence admitted their mistakes, while the royal historian preserved the true record for future generations. Claire accepted the apology, but she also made one promise of her own. Trust, she explained, could grow again only through consistent actions rather than beautiful words. Lucas agreed, without argument. Seasons slowly changed, and when spring finally arrived, the castle gardens bloomed brighter than anyone could remember. Laughter once again filled the courtyard where silence had once ruled. Lucas never forgot that leadership began with humility, while Claire never allowed hardship to steal her compassion. Together they welcomed their child into a family built not upon perfection, but upon honesty, accountability, and hope. Beneath the same full moon that had once witnessed painful separation, the Northern Pax discovered that true strength was never measured by the power to command others, but by the courage to admit mistakes, protect those we love, and choose truth before pride.